Thank you, thank you. This topic about the Buddha's cure for sickness, aging, and death is a very wonderful reflection, and it's also profound. And for some people, when they first hear this title, it can be very mystifying and intriguing, because you wonder, how is he able to find a cure for sickness, aging, and death when he himself, his physical form, had to experience sickness, aging, and death? So that is part of the intriguing aspect of this teaching. And to make it even more intriguing, he was also able to find a cure for birth. Very intriguing indeed. How is that possible? Well, when you hear this reflection, then you understand. It's very profound, but it's so wonderful. Now, before I speak on this subject, I'll just start to say that it is very important in our relationships, because, as you know, life is based on relationship. We do not exist in isolation. We are relating to family, friends, people in the society in general, and of course we have to relate to people in the work environment. Even when you go shopping, you have to relate to other shoppers and to the salespeople. You cannot avoid relationship. Even when you're alone, you're in relationship. How do you relate to your aloneness? Do you feel peaceful and alone, or do you feel lonely? Do you crave for company or outside stimulation? How do you relate to your body? When you look in the mirror and you see an image, how do you relate to that image? How do you relate to your thoughts and emotions? When desire arises in the mind, how do you relate to that desire? Likewise, when fear arises in the mind, how do you relate to that fear? So life is based on relationships. Just like when we're outside, how do you relate to the outside environment? How do you relate to a tree, a plant, a flower? When we see insects, how do you relate to them? How do you relate to the sky, the clouds? And if you can see the moon at night, how do you relate to that? And if you happen to be in a very dark place, away from light pollution, and you see the glory of the Milky Way galaxy, how do you relate to that vast mystery? For example, when I first came last week, you can imagine I was very jet-lagged after 24 hours of flying. And someone took me to the room, and I saw a cockroach. Speaking about relationship, how did I relate to that cockroach? I can tell you, most North Americans would literally freak out. Maybe some Singaporeans too. But to me, seeing a cockroach was like seeing an old friend. I was actually happy to see the cockroach. There was no aversion. because I grew up with cockroaches, in a tropical country. And for those of you who are not sure where Jamaica is, it's the island just south of Cuba. And Cuba is south of Florida. It's in the West Indies or the Caribbean Sea. So I grew up with cockroaches, and when you're in Canada, you rarely see cockroaches. Maybe if you had a long, hot summer, you might see, a cockroach here and there, but they're very rare. So when I saw the cockroach, it was like seeing an old friend. It's like sometimes, I go to a place and I look in the corner of a room, and I see, geckos, the little geckos. And to me, they're so beautiful. They're just very special creatures. And they're harmless. And they are wonderful because you imagine, how can a creature, stick to the walls with such ease and security? Sometimes I wish I had feet and hands like that. But it really is a marvel of nature when you think of it. They're just really beautiful creatures. So again, to the relationship, how do you relate to people? Because we're so conditioned to react. And we're conditioned to label things. And we need labels to communicate. But what happens is that when we put labels on people, out of prejudice, hatred, aversion, ill will, you see that is it's very destructive behavior. It's a form of violence. So we have to be mindful of this. And we're conditioned also to react, and we're quick to judge people, criticize, condemn, compare, or if we don't like what somebody is doing, especially if you're in a relationship with somebody, you want to change them. That's a form of violence. That's a form of disrespect. So always remember, love and respect go together. Love and mutual respect. But very often we take someone for granted and we lose that mutual respect. And we still think we love that person, but actually we don't. We just think we love them. But as long as we lose that mutual respect for someone, there is no love. There's only selfish, craving, and attachment. So this is something we have to be very mindful of. And I see so much negativity in the world. And of course, there's a lot of it in North America. Yeah, of course, that includes Europe also, UK, Europe. And you just have to say, if you're watching YouTube, because it's a very popular thing these days, if you read the comments that people make on all these videos, you really see how people are so distorted, so negative. Even things that's so wonderful, you can appreciate something really wonderful, say, on video. And yet you find some really crazy criticisms, crazy remarks. And you wonder, where are these people coming from? But again, it's the defilements, the pollutions in the mind. So as spiritual beings, brothers and sisters, we have to make sure when we look at the negativity in our mind, to make the effort to purify that negativity. Don't be so willing to judge, put labels on people, to judge, criticize, like or dislike, and so on. And that is the path of purification, the path of loving kindness, compassion, sympathetic joy, and equanimity. Now, first I would like to speak just on birth and death. Now, when we first hear the word birth and we hear the word death, automatically we think of physical birth and physical death, don't we? You know, a baby being born and someone passing away. Physical birth, physical death. But when we practice mindfulness, when we train the mind to focus more and more in the present moment, we see that birth and death has a deeper, significant meaning. I.e., you begin to see the arising of phenomena and the passing away of phenomena. That is birth and death. But initially, we're conditioned always to think of physical birth, physical death. But when we practice, we can let go of just that fixed concept of physical birth, physical death, and we do see that our existence, our daily existence, is based on arising and passing away. Birth and death, moment to moment. For example, just the breath, in-breath, out-breath, that is arising and passing away of the breathing process. You begin to see the birth of a sensation. So if you're sitting and you begin to feel the cramping in your legs, and you shift your legs or you stand up and you see the passing away of that sensation. You see the arising of thought or images and the passing away of thoughts and images. See the arising and passing away of mental phenomena. And every time we speak and we say I, I like or I don't like, you see that is the birth of the ego, the I, the self-image. And the moment the mind is silent, that's the passing away of the I. So this is how the I arises in consciousness. Every time we say, I like this, I don't like this, I want this or I don't want, or I hate this, and and so on, or I disagree, you are creating a self. You're imposing a self on the world of consciousness, because it is consciousness that creates the world. Even your heartbeat, if you're very aware of your heartbeat, you see the arising and falling away of the sensation of the heartbeat. If you're aware, if you can be aware of the blood flow, it's the same thing, arising, passing away. For example, you're seeing at the moment, and you're hearing, and you close your eyes for a moment, there's no seeing consciousness, but there's hearing. Just close your eyes, there's no seeing, but there's hearing. And you open your eyes, and seeing consciousness arises again. See, arising and passing away. Just like listening, hearing, sounds continually arise and pass away. You can try this Just put your finger and touch your hand. Just be aware. See the arising of that touch sensation, the birth of that touch, and you move your hand and you see the passing away of that sensation. Arising, passing away, arising, passing away. All right? But you have to be aware to see this. It is so obvious. And for example, say if you're typing on the keyboard and you're aware, right, you see how many hundreds, thousands of touching sensation arising and passing away. Like same with walking. When we walk mindfully, we see arising and passing away of touch sensation. So in that way we begin to see that life is based on birth and death. Not just physical birth, physical death, but the birth of sensations, sense consciousness, mental, emotional states, and so on. It really is a wonderful thing when we can see that. And the reason why things are constantly changing, including seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, and seeing, is because we are a process of body and mind. We are a process. Because normally we tend to think of just we're selves. We're a self, I'm a personality, I'm this or I'm that. But we forget that actually we are a process of body and mind, what the Buddha calls nama rupa, right? Or rupa nama. And when the Buddha said, see the world as something which is constantly changing and impermanent, see the world as something which is unsatisfactory, uncertain, unreliable, because things are changing, and see the world as something which is devoid of a permanent, solid, separate, independent self. He was not speaking about the external, empirical world, but rather the world of body and mind. The world of nama rupa, this constantly changing process. And we're only aware of the external world because we're able to see, hear, smell, taste, touch, and think. And last night, for example, when we went to bed and we went into deep sleep state, there was no consciousness. The world as we knew it yesterday ceased to exist. Usually it's about 2 to 3 hours in deep sleep. For children, the deep sleep state is a bit longer, but for adults, it's about 2 to 3 hours. This is before the dream state, before the thought process starts up again. But this morning when we woke up, Singapore came into existence. So you can say it is through consciousness, through seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, and so on, that the world comes into being. And this is what the Buddha pointed to. This body and mind with its sense consciousnesses. Now, the Buddha's cure for sickness, aging, and death. As you know, Siddhartha, Prince Siddhartha, when he saw the signs of sickness, aging, and death, it totally transformed him. Being a very sensitive, compassionate, and inquiring person, he was deeply affected by human suffering. And that's why he had to renounce that life and go into the forest in search of truth, understanding. So when Prince Siddhartha made this renunciation and went into the forest, what was foremost in his mind was, how can I find a cure for sickness, aging and death? Because these three things were what really affected him. Why he was totally transformed by it, and why he was able to make that great renunciation. And of course, eventually when he became the Buddha, he was able to find a cure for sickness, aging and death. And at the same time, he was able to find a cure for birth, which is really intriguing when you think of it. Now, what was this cure? Obviously, you're asking. This was obviously not a physical cure, meaning he didn't find some magic medicine in the forest. A mixture of herbs, special medicinal herbs that could cure him of sickness, aging and death. Right? Because as you know, his physical body had to experience these things. So the cure was obviously a mental, psychological cure, based on his profound insight, understanding and wisdom into the nature of self and non-self, i.e. the profound experience of emptiness, what we call sunyata. Now, when we first hear the word emptiness, it's a very strange word. And we tend to think of emptiness as nothingness, or like a vacuum. And that's why it can be very confusing initially. But emptiness simply means empty of something. Like a cup is full of water, and then it is empty of water. But an empty cup is full of air. It might be empty of water, liquid, but is full of air and space, because air and space go together. So emptiness regarding the nature of consciousness means empty of self, or empty of a permanent self. And you can say that the expression of loving kindness and compassion are expressions of emptiness, meaning empty of ego, of self, because that is the virtue of the four sublime states. The ego, the self, is not in operation. And that's why there's freedom. That's why it is a virtue. So the Buddha, when he reflected on the physical body, he began to realize that this body does not belong to me. It's not me, it's not mine. Because this is the way we're conditioned. We identify with the body as something personal. And because we identify with the body, we have all the, the anxieties, the worries, the fears, the frustration, and the depression, especially when the body is aging. And we begin to see the limitations of our existence when we no longer have this vitality of youth. We can get very depressed. And there are many people who are very depressed because of the aging process. They don't have this wisdom of non-self. So the Buddha realized that this body, because it can never really obey our commands. If you tell the body not to get sick, the body will get sick, whether we like it or not. If you tell the body not to get hungry, not to get tired, not to eat, and of course not to go to a washroom, the body does anyway. And if you tell the body not to age, not to die, the body will age, it will die. Because it follows its own natural laws. So on that reflection, you begin to see more and more the body is the non-self. The body does not belong to me, it belongs to nature. Or you can say the changing conditions of nature. So when we understand that deeply, the mind can be at peace. It can be in harmony, you can say in harmony with the changing conditions of the physical body. So there's more peace, calmness, acceptance, and non-attachment. Now, the Buddha said because we're conditioned to identify with the body, we also identify with the changing conditions of the body. We say, I am sick, or this is my sickness, whatever the disease is. We say, this is mine, my sickness, I am sick. Likewise, my aging, I'm aging, I'm getting old. It's my aging, it's something personal. And likewise, I'm dying or I'm going to die, so this is my death. So when we cling and grasp to not only to the body but its conditions, my sickness, my aging, my death, there is suffering. So he said when we have this understanding of non-self, then the mind does not suffer. We begin to see that birth, sickness, aging, and death are just physical changes, changing conditions of the body. It is just changing phenomena. And the mind is no longer grasping to my sickness, my aging, my death. And so there is no suffering, no dukkha. Yes, we can experience, physical pain, physical discomfort. But the Buddha points more to the mental, emotional suffering. The worry, the anxiety, the anger, the depression, and so on. So that was the cure the Buddha found. Does that make sense? Maybe if it doesn't at the moment, just reflect on it. And then one day you will see, oh, of course. Now when it comes to birth, this is even more intriguing. First we have to reflect on what happens when a baby is born. When a baby is born, a baby doesn't jump up and says, hey, look at me, I am born today. Does it? No. A baby is not aware that it's born. It's just born. Yes, a baby is born, but the baby does not have that awareness that I am born. But because we live in a human world and we use human convention, our parents, have to give us names. And the parents have to fill in a birth certificate, right? Date of time of birth, date of birth. But a baby is not aware of this, is it? Because it's just human convention. And then after a year, the parents say, oh, this is wonderful, especially if the child, is healthy enough to survive. Because, throughout history, many babies did not survive to their, first birthday. Actually, before we had all this modern medical technology, it was very normal for, for families to lose 2 or 3 babies. And that was considered normal. Now, of course, if a couple loses a child or there's a miscarriage or something, it's a lot of suffering. It's more difficult for us to accept death. And very often before, children that were born prematurely, most of them would die. It's just nature's way. But now we have all this technology, and now most premature babies can survive. At least in, modern countries. In other places, they die, and it's just a part of nature. Now, by a child's first birthday, the parents will mark that first birthday. But for a young child, it's not that important. And at that age, of course, life is interesting, so interesting, full of wonder. So the significance of the first birthday is not that, not that big, not that great. The second birthday is a little more interesting, because of course the child is getting more awareness. Third birthday, fourth birthday is getting more and more interesting. Because not only you're having a lot of fun with your young friends, party and ice cream and cake and games, but presents, right? You're starting to get presents, just like Christmas. So the significance of a birthday becomes more and more important in a child's development. And the idea that I am born on a certain date and I have a certain age. In other words, the idea of birthdays and age is a matter of conditioning, right? Likewise, the self, the idea of I, me, mine, is a slow conditioning in a child's mind. And that is an important thing to understand. So the cure for birth that the Buddha found was to understand this, that the self we have at this moment, who we are, this self was never born. It is something that was slowly conditioned in the mind. But of course, if you look at your birth certificate, you will say, oh, I was born on such and such a date, and every time that date comes around, this is my birthday. And we become very attached to that day as my birthday. But the truth is, we were never born, as a self. Only, yes, a young baby was born, but the self that we do have now was a result of conditioning. Yes? Can you see that? That is what the Buddha is pointing to. It's very profound. But once you see it, you reflect on it, you see, of course, so simple. But it is difficult to let go of this attachment to birthdays. Because, every time you have to fill out a form, right? Date of birth, right? We go through our entire lives filling out forms, and we have to fill out date of birth, which keeps, reaffirming that we were born on such and such a date, but really it's an illusion. So yes, we can't just throw our date of birth out the window, but when we have the wisdom, we can become less and less attached to this idea of a birthday. And on a personal note, for me, I see it as a good practice when my birthday will have come and gone, and it's like, just another day. And for me, that's a good sign that I'm able to let go of that attachment. And it is a strong attachment. Because you know if your birthday is coming up, and people who are close to you, you know, your spouse, your best friend, if they forget your birthday, you know, it's big drama, isn't it? And all the expectations you have, right, about this day, it's so important, but actually it's not. So if you think it's so important, it means that you have to practice and develop more of this understanding, this wisdom. It's very profound, but when we can see that and liberate our minds from this strong attachment, it is so wonderful. And that includes the attachment to the idea of age. You know, that I'm, 20, 30, 40, and so on. Because in the end, it's not important. And usually when people ask me my age, I say, I'm timeless. And people will give me, a very horrified look. Because, they want a number, right? We're very attached to a number. Even if I say 150, they're not too bad about that. They might be a little mystified, but at least they have a number, they can relate to. Because usually when I say I'm timeless, they think I'm being a wise guy, or I'm being mysterious, very cosmic. Like I've been watching too much those space programs, Star Trek and the fourth dimension, that type of thing. But really, when one is practicing and you're more calm and you're more in the present moment, you begin to feel more timeless, because you're less and less attached to past memories and future projections. You can rest in this present moment awareness, because you understand that this is your true nature. A present moment awareness with its intuitive knowing. And I say that this intuitive knowing is much more significant, is much more intelligent than we tend to believe. For example, when we breathe in mindfully, we know we're breathing in. When we breathe out mindfully, we know we're breathing out. When we're hungry, when we're tired, we know we're hungry or tired, there's no doubt. If you have to go to a washroom, you know you have to go. You don't sit around and theorize. You just go. It's a natural intelligence, just like when you're hungry. When you're very sleepy, you just go to sleep. No arguments. If you're driving and you have to pay attention, you know whether or not it's safe, to turn right, left, to make an exit, or whether you have to change lanes, right? There's a knowing, an intelligence. And if you're a pedestrian, you have to cross a road, you turn right, left, right, and you know whether or not it is safe to cross, right? It's a natural intelligence. And if you don't use this natural intelligence, you just get run over. It's that simple. So this awareness, this unconditioned state of mind and intuitive knowing, it's a very important thing, because it is our original mind, our true nature. And it is what gives us the ability to look at the mind, see thoughts, and see the I thought. Every time the mind says I, which is what we normally, are very attached to, we begin to see that this I is not who we are. It is just a thought. And it's not permanent, it's not something which is permanent. Because the I is always related to memory. And the Buddha, he was the first one to see this truth. That this I, that the mind creates, is not who we are. And it's just a result of conditioning and memory and thinking. Because if we go through our entire lives thinking that this I, this mind-created I, is who we are, we'll be subject to constant anxiety, worry, fear, craving, disappointment, anger, frustration, and fear. And that includes the fear of death. Because the I does not want to die. In essence, it's thinking itself that is afraid to come to an end. Because we're caught in this very powerful mind stream, the thought process. So it is so important to understand what this thought process is. Because it is the thought process which creates this sense of self. Every time we think I. And for those of you who had not heard the talks before, we begin to see that thinking, this process, is based on three things in the mind. Memory, past experience, and knowledge, information. You can see that in your own mind. Thinking is related to memory. And memory is connected to past experience. And thinking is related to information that's stored in the mind as knowledge. And every day we put more and more information, either from other people, from books, if you're taking a study course, or you get information from another person, or from internet. You can say that thinking is just recycling all the information that's in the mind. Every time we think, we're just recycling mental stuff. If you care to look at it, yeah. And it doesn't matter what language we think in, it's the same thought process. Whether it's Mandarin, Hokkien, French, Russian, Japanese, etc., it's the same thought process. You're just thinking in different words, but it's the same process. And the same process that's based on memory, past experience, and knowledge. And it projects itself in the future. You can see that in your own minds, don't you? This movement in time. Past, future, past, future. Because that is the conditioning we have. And this is something that the Buddha saw very clearly. He used that unconditioned state of mind, awareness, attention, mindfulness, to see the conditioned mind, the conditioned process. And with that intuitive knowing. Because that's one of the meaning of the word Buddha. Not only one who is awakened, enlightened, but one who knows. Not intellectually, but intuitively, as we just explained. We must reflect on life until we realize that suffering arises from grasping and clinging. Birth, sickness, growing old, and death are conditions of nature. They are not suffering where there is no attachment to my birth, my sickness, my aging, and my death. At the moment we are grasping at birth, sickness, aging, and death as ours. This is wrong view caused by habitual conditioning. If we don't grasp and take things personally, they are not suffering. Birth, sickness, aging, and death are just bodily changes, bodily phenomena. With right understanding, right view, birth, illness, aging, and death disappear, only changing conditions of nature. And the my disappear at the same time. There is no longer an I or my, and so this conditioning is not suffering. There is peace, acceptance, freedom, and non-attachment. This is the way to overcome birth, sickness, aging, and death. No one and nothing can free you but your own understanding. Everything on earth, on this beautiful planet, lives, dies, comes into being, and withers away. To grasp this whole movement of life requires intelligence. Not the intelligence of thought or books or knowledge, but the intelligence of love and compassion, with its sensitivity. Death isn't some horrific thing, something to avoid, something to fear, to be postponed, but rather something to be with day in and day out. And out of that extraordinary sense, and out of that comes an extraordinary sense of love, mystery, joy, and immensity. Normally, when we think of death, our own death, we think of it as an event in the future, don't we? Something, that is scary. It's the unknown. And we try to push death as far into the future as possible. Especially when we're having, a fairly good life. Because, if you're really suffering, you would rather die sooner than later. It's just the fact. And of course, the less attachments we have, the less fear we have of death. Because one of the fears of death is the letting go of attachments. Because we have so many. and as we go through life, we accumulate more and more attachments. Not only physical attachments, wealth, money, etc., but we accumulate a lot of knowledge, don't we? Knowledge, information, and so on. I know we have internet. I wouldn't be surprised if some people would like to believe that heaven, an afterlife, you will have high-speed internet. 24/7, and it's absolutely free. That would be an ideal, wouldn't it, of heaven? Now, all the great teachers, all the great mystics, they say that instead of seeing death as an event in the future, we should bring it closer and closer and closer and bring it into our daily lives. So we learn how to die while we're alive. Have you heard that teaching? How do we do that? How can we die where we're alive? It obviously means mental, psychological dying, doesn't it? Because physically, we're still alive. And mental, psychological dying simply means learning how to let go. Let go of problems, of unpleasant memories, of past hurts, past conflicts, and so on. Because when we can do that, we're continuously freeing the mind, you can say. Otherwise, the mind becomes burdened by all this past experience, especially unpleasant, hurtful experiences. It makes a lot of sense when you think of it. So our minds become more light, more free, and definitely we'll feel much better. And we are more in the present moment. Because initially, our unpleasant memories, if we are very attached to them, we identify very strongly with them, they seem so solid, so permanent, don't they? Every time you think about it. But when we practice, we have mindfulness, we have more understanding, you begin to see that these unpleasant memories are not permanent or solid after all. But rather, they are just thoughts and images that are happening in the present moment. Only thoughts and images that are happening now. You can see that in the light of awareness. And that is very liberating. And this is why all healing of past wounds and conflicts can only take place in the present moment. When you're able to see it for what it is. Only thoughts and images that are happening now. Likewise, what we think of the future are also thoughts, images, and some ideas that are happening now in the present moment. And that's also very liberating. But it doesn't mean that we can't have, certain goals, certain plans regarding the future. But it just means that we should not become too attached, too obsessed with those future goals or plans. Because if you do, you're asking for a lot of trouble, right? Anxiety, worry, fear, and so on. Because as we said, whenever you have desires and plans, you always have fear, some worry, anxiety, that those goals, those plans will not be realized. So yes, we can still make plans, but they should only be tentative, tentative, flexible ideas. Don't be too attached to them, because life is uncertain. And sometimes we achieve certain things and it's not what we expected. So we are disappointed. Or sometimes our priorities have changed. By the time we achieve certain things, our priorities have changed, so they're not so meaningful, not so important. And yes, sometimes we feel happy when we accomplish certain goals. There's a sense of accomplishment, and so on. And that's fine. But that feeling, it doesn't last too long. I would say 2 weeks maximum. 2 weeks. Because life is changing, life is uncertain. So this learning to let go is an aspect of dying, physical, psychological dying. It's very, very liberating. There's a very wonderful saying. It says, empty-handed I came into this world, barefooted I leave it. My coming, my going. Two simple happenings that got entangled and complicated in between. Empty-handed I came into this world, barefooted I leave it. My coming, my going. Two simple happenings that got entangled and complicated in between. It's a good reflection. And the other one is from the Tibetan tradition. It says, when we're born, we cry, but the world rejoices. And when we die, the world cries, but we may attain the great liberation. When we're born, we cry, but the world rejoices. And when we die, the world cries, but we may attain the great liberation. It's very wonderful. I'd just like to share with you a very profound poem on death by this Christian mystic from Lebanon. Maybe some of you might have heard of him, Khalil Gibran. Have you heard of Khalil Gibran? Yeah. His well-known book is called The Prophet. And the poem goes like this. For what is it to die, but to stand naked in the wind and to melt into the sun? And what is it to cease breathing, but to free the breath from its restless tides, that it may rise and expand and seek God unencumbered, without hindrance? Only when you drink from the river of silence shall you indeed sing. And when you have reached the mountain top, then you shall begin to climb. And when the earth shall claim your limbs, only then shall you truly dance. For life and death are one, as the oceans and rivers are one. For what is it to die, but to stand naked in the wind and to melt into the sun? And what is it to cease breathing, but to free the breath of its restless tides, that it may rise and expand and seek God unencumbered, without hindrance? Only when you drink from the river of silence shall you indeed sing. And when you have reached the mountain top, then you will begin to climb. And when the earth shall claim your limbs, then shall you truly dance. For life and death are one, as the oceans and rivers are one. So I offer this for your reflection. May you all be well, happy, and peaceful.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Okay, brothers and sisters, any questions for today's talk? Yes, brother.
Thank you, Bhante. Two questions I had. The first question is about this mind, I, and self. So the mind part is quite easy to understand. What is mind? Is there a difference between the I and the self, or is it the same thing? The first question.
It's the same thing. Because you see, one of the aspects of self, how it is created, it's not only through thinking, as we just explained, thinking and memory, but it's because we have to communicate. You know, we're humans and we have to use language, and therefore we need labels, you know, I, you, he, she, we, them, and so on. We cannot avoid that, it's just language. But what happens is that because we are using the same language, the same label all the time, say in English, I, all the time. And as you know, if you have to speak a lot, just in one day, we can use this I hundreds of times. So it gives the impression in consciousness, because you're using this I, so regularly, and it's the same label, it gives us that impression that this I is everlasting, always there and rock solid. We might see, changes, obvious changes around us, but this I never changes, right? Because we keep saying I. But really, it's a delusion in the mind. And we begin to think that this I is who we are, and it begins to feel, that this I is at the center of the world, or the center of the universe. Because we also say, I'm seeing this, I'm hearing this, I'm smelling, I'm tasting, I'm touching, and I'm thinking. So we believe that there's a center of experience. There's an experiencer, which is who is experiencing. But actually there is no experiencer. That is the interesting thing. In other words, our senses, seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, and so on, they're actually happening by themselves. Have you ever noticed that? Yes. When you're looking at something, do you have to make an effort to look? If your eyes are healthy, you don't have to make an effort to look. Seeing consciousness arises naturally. Light from the object enters the retina, creates an image on the back, and then the optic nerves picks up the image, and there's seeing consciousness. Likewise, hearing. You don't have to make an effort to hear at this moment, do you? It's automatic. When you're eating, do you have to make an effort to taste the food? It's automatic. And if you have some doubt about this, the next time you eat something, say to yourself, okay, I'm going to eat this, but I'm going to refuse to taste the food. You try and see what happens. Don't listen to me. Don't believe a word I say. See it for yourself. Likewise, touching. And most of the time thinking is just, it's just compulsive, it's automatic. And sometimes we're not even aware that we're thinking. The mind is just busy thinking, automatically, and we believe everything that comes in the mind. We identify very strongly with those thoughts and images, including the I thought every time we think I. Very interesting. And this was one of the insights of the Buddha. He could see that. There's no I which is seeing, there's no I which is hearing. But because we use language, that is the thing. Because we use language and we have that habit of identifying with these experiences. We say, I'm seeing that tree. And it's nice, I like it or I don't like it. Or I hear something, it's nice, or it's not so or it's noisy, the discriminating mind comes in. So you believe that there's a listener, a hearer, which is separate from sound. Likewise, we believe that there's a seer or an observer separate from the visible object. We create a duality, you can say, a duality in experience. Subject and object, right? I am seeing, that's subject, that's the duality. And likewise, I am thinking, right? I'm thinking good thoughts or I'm thinking bad thoughts. So we think that there's a thinker separate from thoughts. But actually, there's no thinker separate from thoughts. The thinker is thought. It's a part of thinking. When you say, I am thinking, that's all thinking. Quite interesting. And when we can see through this duality, it's very liberating. But of course, we still have to use language, and we still have to use this I, don't we? When we have the understanding and the awareness, we still have to use I. The only difference is that we no longer take this I so seriously, huh? Because we know that it's only a language, a label that we're using to communicate. That's all. We're no longer attached to it. We no longer believe that it is at the center of the world, and I am the most important thing on the planet. Because then you get proud, arrogant, and conceited. The mental defilements arise. Very interesting, isn't it? You've been to a conference. Have any of you been to a conference where there's lots of people, right? And everybody has a name tag, right? John Smith, Mary Brown, because there's so many people, so many names. But then you look, oh yes, you're, or Mr. Tan or Mr. Go, and so on, because it's an easy way to identify each other. But it is only a label. You see, names are actually just labels that were given to us for, easy communication. But what happens is that when we lose perspective, we become very attached to the names. So if we forget somebody's name or we call somebody by a different name, big drama. I don't know about here, but in North America it's like that. Yeah. Because they take themselves so seriously. And the name, my God, you forget somebody's name, big drama. And this is why it is much better to say to somebody, I'm really sorry, but I've forgotten your label. You see that? There's much more wisdom in that, because a name is just a label. Likewise, the I, you, he, she, are just labels for communication. Yeah.
Thank you. The second question is that the concept of dying before you die, has it got to be practiced on a daily basis, or is it a one-off event, or is it what?
Only on Sunday, right? Okay. Well, do you need time off for breathing? If you can be aware, you can be aware of this letting go. Just try letting go. And it's very easy, actually. The principle is very easy. You keep coming back to the present moment, whatever it is. Sure, you're busy, you're involved with something, but when you're over, you come back to the present moment. If you've had a busy day at work, you come home, you let go of work. So you can enjoy being at home. And that's a big problem today. People are physically at home, but mentally, psychologically, they're still at work, right? And that's not healthy. And of course, with computers now, it's even more difficult, right? Because you can always work from home. So that very practice of letting go, keep coming back to the present moment, is so important. Yeah. And I told this story about, when I had a close encounter with a cobra snake in Sri Lanka. I really learned about letting go. Because when you meet a cobra so, in striking distance, ooh. I can tell you, I've never been so awake in my life. Yes. All your nerves are so heightened. It's a small thing. When you think of it, it's very small. But, the potential danger awakens you. You're so present. And whatever is in your mind, what dukkha, nonsense, zoom, it's gone. That's dying. It's amazing, really. It's amazing. Yeah. Then you understand what it means to be fully awake. Yeah.
So, brother and sister, we have time for one more question. Just one more. Okay.
I follow well the subject on the aging and death. My question a little bit opposite to what you explained, unnatural death. Lately, either from TV or from YouTube, we see that people who believe to God, and normally they also come from the country where considered religious, and they prepare to sacrifice the life by carrying the explosive. Of course, during his death, there are many people also cry because they think many people die also in the explosive, in the place where there are many people. So my question, looking on this, the people by intellectual, they're all right. They're also not very old, is going to be die anyway, no, but they prepare to death. So how to eliminate this happening from time to time? Even just recently happened also in Paris. So maybe I'd like to hear from you, from your, maybe in the form of teaching, not necessarily Buddhism, but then I'm talking in the spiritual. You have any antidote to overcome this?
You mean apart from meeting the cobra snake? You mean how to deal with all these, tragedies and so on, right? Yeah.
How to minimize, because this happened again and again. I just take it as a we take it as open-minded. Yeah? This happened also to the, we call it religious. I'm not very particular. I'm not putting the label. And it's quite challenging, maybe. I'm looking from the teaching side.
Okay. First of all, personally, I try to watch as little news as possible. No, but I'm serious, just for my mental health. Because if you're watching all the time, you're just bombarded constantly. And I know people who get so angry, so depressed because they just watch too much television. It's not healthy, occasionally, and there are educational programs and so on, they're okay. But if you're watching all this bad news all the time, it's not healthy. Because it's a part of consciousness, right? It affects consciousness. Yeah. So apart from that, we have to realize that things happen. And so if you think about all these problems, you can be overwhelmed. Not only these tragedies, but there's overpopulation, there's corruption, there's so many things, poverty, you name it, pollution, the threat of nuclear weapons, all these things. If you think about them, they can really overwhelm you. So myself, when I think about all those things, I calm my mind. And I find that timeless, that silent, timeless dimension within myself. And I use the model of the ocean, the surface of the ocean, which is vast, deep. And I see all these events that are happening, they are like waves on the surface of the ocean. They arise, they pass away. They arise and they pass away, returning to that vast and deep, peaceful dimension of the ocean. This is what I do. Because at the same time we have to have a vaster dimension of who we are and where we're existing. We tend to be just caught up on this planet, all the events. But when we can go within ourselves to find that that timeless dimension, that silence, that stillness, we're in touch with that timeless dimension of the universe. Because we are part of the universe. We are the universe in this physical form, this temporary physical form, being aware of itself. Or you can say the universe is using us in this temporary physical form as a way of being aware of itself. And then I reflect on, say, the planet and the solar system. Just the size of the solar system, compared to us, which is very vast. And then you think that the size of the solar system is just a mere speck inside the Milky Way galaxy. Yes. And it is timeless. Just a moment.
Okay.
And then to think, to reflect that there are countless galaxies. Countless galaxies. So for me, I find it healthy when I can be in touch with that vaster dimension, vaster and timeless dimension that we are existing in. Because if we only think about this planet, and all the problems, we become very limited, we become very anxious, very angry, very frustrated. And at the same time, we have to be thankful, really thankful that where we are, say in Singapore or in Canada, that we can live a more peaceful and secure life. Don't take these things for granted. That we can have, daily food and so on. And good health also. Always be thankful that we have good health. So is that beneficial?
May I? It's beneficial, yes. But maybe I like to clarify, maybe the way I express it are not fully clear to Bhante. I'm not worried on what we see in the TV. I'm not so worried with the drama because we see and again and again. My question is looking from the teaching point of view, because this case happened. I speak also with in Singapore with the government people. He is from the from the defense, and also I see from a few friends in Indonesia where there are. I think from Indonesia there were 700 people going there just for getting this, because they believe with God, and whatever happened, we also sometimes, oh my God, happened. I hear also from your teaching a few days, oh my God, something happened. We do say that. But this is referring to the people who believe the God, and these people to some extent also have some kind of, maybe I can say imagination going to heaven. So now, we as a society, I'm talking in Singapore or in Canada, with this, we don't face it this. But I know, I learned from my friend who are from defense, this can happen even here. It's not so easy with the security, we increase security. But maybe, my thinking now to the question to you, when I say antidote, what society can do, especially related to the spiritual teaching maybe, to clear this understanding. Because this also happened just recently in Australia. It was in the Channel News Asia. The person is well educated, got degree, and he prepared to die. So, back to you. Looking from the teaching on the spiritual, without labeling the religion, is there anything antidote to this?
You must understand that you are not separate from society. Our minds are a result of society. We are conditioned by society. So you have to work on your state of consciousness, because it's not separate. Do you know you could be in a very remote place, and you think you're alone, but as long as you're thinking all the time and you're attached to your mental, emotional world, you are not alone. Because that very mental, emotional state is a result of society. One is truly alone when the mind is absolutely silent and free. That's right. Don't underestimate the silence. The silence of the mind is something very, very timeless. It is very profound. Don't underestimate it. Just like don't underestimate the intuitive knowing of the mind, as I just demonstrated. It's much more intelligent than we think. And you have to understand the limitations of our minds, of thinking. So all I can say to you, my brother, work on your mind, find that silence, and let go of all these thoughts, these concepts, beliefs, and find that timeless dimension in you. Therein lies peace and freedom from samsara.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.